In Chapter 19, Section 1, we're going to talk about life on Earth and how it's made and how it's changed over time. So how about we start with fossils and then a timeline. So we have evidence for fossils back to 3.5 billion years ago. Now granted, these weren't animal fossils or fish, these are bacteria. But we can also get evidence of early life from 3.85 billion years ago. So that's a really long time ago, so let's put it into context. Here's a time scale for the entire history of Earth. So here is 4.55 billion years ago when the Earth formed, all the way up to the present. And for the last half billion years, we zoom in down here. So let's point out some key times here. So we have evidence that the oceans formed about 4.4 billion years ago. And on this time scale, that looks really close to the formation of the Earth. So then let's jump up to 3.5 billion years ago when we have early fossil evidence for life. And that's still eons ago compared to where we are today and how long humans have been around. So life has been on Earth for an amazingly long time. 2 billion years ago, we have evidence that oxygen was building up in the atmosphere. Now, Earth's original atmosphere should have been water vapor and carbon dioxide like the other terrestrial planets. But Earth is different because we had the carbon cycle that absorbed a lot of the CO2 and locked it away into oceans. A lot of the water vapor rained out, formed the oceans. Also now we have life, algae, cyanobacteria producing oxygen. And the oxygen is going to take some time to build up in the atmosphere. So up until this point, you have no life on Earth that breathes oxygen like we do. It's not possible yet. There's not enough oxygen in the atmosphere. The oxygen is going to build up, and at some point you get a huge explosion of diversity in life on Earth. It's called the Cambrian explosion, and that was 500 million years ago. You guys are probably familiar with the dinosaurs going extinct 65 million years ago, but they were on Earth from about 225 million years ago to 65 million years ago. And so now we go to humans, and the beginning of humans and the current era of humans on this scale is just a line on the present. Even on the zoom in, we barely have any perspective for our existence on Earth. We are very, very, very recent. So all of the samples of life that we have been able to take and analyze, every single one of them is based on DNA. All the life we have been able to find on Earth uses DNA, which is an acronym for deoxyribonucleic acid, but everybody calls it DNA. And that's amazing. DNA is really complicated, but it works amazingly well. But why should every single animal and bacteria and amoeba on Earth share this molecule in their cells? Also, all discovered species on Earth share 23 universal proteins. That's also amazing that that's possible, unless there's some other explanation for it. So let's try to plot it out. Let's try to see how related humans are to different types of animals and try to piece it together. And so that would get us to trying to map out what we call the tree of life. And it turns out that you could say that all life is related if you go back far enough in time. Like, I've got my mom. I go back further, I got my grandma. You go back further, you got your mom's mom. Yeah, well, if you go back 3 billion years, you're pretty much related to bacteria. And that's a humbling view, but it also makes you feel like the larger collective of the planet Earth, and I actually think it's amazing. I love to think about this stuff. So I'm going to call the relationships between all living things on Earth, amazing evidence that we all come from a common ancestor. And did you guys know that now they can trace back where your mom's mom came from? Because the DNA inside of your mitochondria only comes from your mom. And so they can trace back where your female lineage came from. And so I actually had my DNA tested. You can do it now for a couple $100, so I may have splurged. I've found distant cousins who are related to me because of the computing power and the DNA analysis now. I'm like, if I went back further, I could say I would be related to, everybody here. So this is a very simple cartoon version of the Tree of Life. Let me show you a different version. This one shows more branches for a different species, but not all of them. There's too complicated. There's too many species on Earth. But I like some of the things about this graph. Here's your common ancestor, the beginning. We don't know exactly what it was. It would have been a single cell. And these are arcs of time, and it marks out certain periods of time where there were mass extinctions and lots of these branches end. And I hate to tell you guys, but we are actually living in one right now. We are living in an era of mass extinction. While I love this graph and I think it's fascinating, it helps me picture my relationship to everything else on Earth, there are a few ways that this is misleading, and the website points them out very well. And I love websites that point out how their data might be misleading. One thing this Tree of Life did is it stressed, there's got plenty of room to show mammals and amphibians and reptiles and birds. This Tree of Life is going to focus on how numerous the species are instead of trying to make a little spot for humans, make us feel special. So you've got all these different species of bacteria. Let me just point out where humans would be. Humans would be down in here somewhere, and we don't even get a label. So obviously this has to do with the theory of evolution. So let me just do the very basics of it, but this is fascinating material, and there's an amazing body of evidence for it. And if you've got some spare time, wander through some reliable websites and see what you can find out. There's a lot of cool stuff. So the theory of evolution is just that life changes through time. DNA sometimes gets a mistake, and sometimes that might lead into a new species. But kind of working backwards in time, what that means is that our species split off, separated from other species, and that we're related to them. In this figure, it's trying to highlight some of the similarities between a human, a cat, a whale, and a bat. Right? But what is much more striking to me is the similarities between embryos of different animals, and just how much a human looks like a salamander. And it's really as the embryo grows that it starts to become different. Almost like our base code is the same. So most people think evolution takes a really, really long time, which, it does. But we've actually seen evolution also happen on human timescales if we're studying bacteria. So here's a short video that came out fairly recently about the evolution of bacteria as it adjusts to antibiotics.
So what we ended up building was basically a petri dish, except that it's 2 feet by 4 feet. And the way we set it up is that there are 9 bands, and at the base of each of these bands, we put a normal petri dish thick agar with different amounts of antibiotic. On the outside, there's no antibiotic. Just in from that, there's barely more than the E. coli can survive. Inside of that, there's 10 times as much, 100 times, and then finally the middle band has 1,000 times as much antibiotic. And then across the top of it, pour some thin agar that bacteria can move around in. The background is black because there's ink in it, and the bacteria appear as white. First, you see they spread in the area where there's no antibiotic, up until the point they can no longer survive. Then a mutant appears on the right. It's resistant to the antibiotic, it spreads until it starts to compete with other mutants around it. When these mutants hit the next boundary, they too have to pause and develop new mutations to make it into 10 times as much antibiotic. And then you see the different mutants repeat this at 100. And after about 11 days, they finally make it into 1,000 times as much antibiotic as the wild type can survive. And so we can see by this process of accumulating successive mutations that bacteria, which are normally sensitive to an antibiotic, can evolve resistance to extremely high concentrations in a short period of time.
So I'm hoping all of you have heard of antibiotic resistance. It's quite important, and if you haven't heard of it, spend some time looking around on the internet at reliable sources. Let's go back and imagine how that common ancestor, that first cell, that first life based on DNA happened to arise. And we don't know. So I'm going to label this slide a hypothesis. Okay? Not a theory, capital T theory, a scientific theory with lots of scientific evidence behind it. So maybe on Earth there were building blocks of life, carbon, oxygen, maybe some complex molecules. And then RNA formed. RNA is ribonucleic acid and membranes around them, which gets the nickname of pre-cells. And over time, the RNA changes and it evolves and eventually forms into DNA. And the DNA has just proved such a stable way to encode life and form cells and multiply that it just never stopped. It just kept multiplying and multiplying. Oops, a mutation. Multiply, multiply, multiply. And throw in a few more mutations. It just kept going. Okay, so now we have this idea. Wouldn't it be nice if we could find some evidence for it, or maybe just completely prove it wrong? So let's see what people have done. There have been experiments that shows that the building blocks of life, so like proteins or complex molecules, can just form spontaneously if it's given the right conditions, like the right temperature, the right atomic elements. Now, I'm not saying life forms spontaneously. We haven't done that in a lab. And in other experiments, they have made basically a protocell or pre-cell. It's just the enclosed membrane, but without any DNA. So it does kind of seem like these different pieces of life can form if you give them the right conditions, but we don't know the details. Right now, it just looks like our hypothesis is possible. So let's recap what life on Earth is and what it needs before we go out and kind of imagine what might be out in the solar system or out in the galaxy. So life as we know it, we need DNA, which is based on carbon. So let's just say we need carbon. We need energy and nutrients. All life on Earth needs some amount of liquid water. I would like to point out that there are lots of weird types of life on Earth that can survive in conditions that we originally didn't think was possible. And so these are called extremophiles. And there's acidophiles who like to live in acid, alkalophiles who like to live in bases, halophiles in really salty places, toxitolerant extremophiles, and they can survive huge amounts of radiation. And we didn't think it was possible that DNA could survive this, but they have developed mechanisms to survive. Xerophiles grow with very little water, psychrophiles in extreme cold, thermophiles in extreme heat, barophiles in high pressure, and endoliths inside solid rock. So life on Earth is incredibly tenacious and is living in all kinds of environments. So maybe, if life could spontaneously happen somewhere else in the universe, maybe we'll find life in forms or in places that we wouldn't have expected. There is also a hypothesis that life didn't spontaneously come together and happen on Earth. What if that common ancestor, what if that one cell actually hitched a ride to Earth? Maybe it came on a meteorite. Meteorites come to Earth mostly from asteroids, bits of comets, but we also have found chunks of rock on the surface of Earth that look like they've been blasted off of Venus, right? And chunks of rock that have come from Mars. Or what about a rock that had been traveling for hundreds of thousands of years from a completely different solar system? Right? These are possibilities. One of the extremophiles on Earth has become really, really popular. It's the tardigrade. There's a picture of it right there. It's both cute and terrifying at the same time, but it's microscopic. But the tardigrades can survive huge amounts of radiation. They can survive for long periods of time with no water, and they can survive the vacuum of space in hibernation, and then come back to life when you put them in a warm place with some water. These are amazing, and they have the nickname of water bears if you wanted to look them up and Google them.